Hi, I'm Julia Bruton. This is about We Are Woman, a podcast exploring female and new aspects on the topic of VR.
Yasmin, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how did you find your way to VR?
Yes, I'd love to. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm really excited by the themes and angle you're exploring with this podcast. So, my name is Yasmin Elayat. I'm an artist, I'm a director and producer and co-founder of Scatter, which is an immersive company based in Brooklyn, New York that pioneers volumetric filmmaking, and we're the creators of DepthKit, which is the most widely used software solution for volumetric video. And we've also the creators of a body of award-winning work of volumetric films. And speaking about my journey, I came to VR. My background is actually technical, so I'm a computer scientist, and I worked as a software engineer. And went to art school after that. So after art school, my entire career has been about telling stories in new ways using emerging technologies. So before virtual reality, it was the web, interactive docs. It was the iPhone, when it came out in 2007, and so forth and so forth, and using different emerging technologies over the years. Because for me, I see myself as a storyteller number one, or storyteller first, and then even though I am a technologist by training, I think of myself as tech agnostic, actually. So I'm interested right now, obviously, in immersive media, and virtual reality is definitely fascinating, but I also see myself as whatever the story or the creative idea that's drawing me right now. I see what technology makes sense for it, and I'll pursue it in that way. And yeah, I would say that how I got to there's I think a background to already being drawn to emerging technology, and then I also have a background in experience design experience design for cultural spaces, companies. So basically, spatial narratives is a way to think about it, because you're building architecturally museum exhibits or installations and lobbies and corporations. And there's a way of thinking about how do you tell a story to audiences in a spatial way from that background. So I'd say the mix of all my training plus my own artistic practice, it really just converged in a very seamless way for me when virtual reality started becoming more viable, with more viable headsets, and an ecosystem started building. And around 2016, actually in 2016 is when we co-founded Scatter. And it was when I was in between, I was transitioning, trying to figure out what's next. I was in a moment where I was I left the experience design space, and I was wanted to explore VR. I really was excited about it at the time. And I was already friends with James, George, and Alexander Porter, who we co-founded Scatter back then. And as a hybrid company, where the idea was to build DepthKit, which was a tool they've been developing as an open source toolkit, and create a product out of it. And I was very excited about using DepthKit and really pushing the technology and figuring out what this discipline, or this emerging language of what we call volumetric filmmaking. And so that's where the idea of volumetric filmmaking came from. And that's what I've been doing for 6 years. And a lot of my work, that's what we call our body of work. And I guess that's where it all started.
How do you find the themes or the topics for the pieces so far that you created and narrated?
I have definitely a draw to stories that are maybe you can consider political, or in relation to what is happening around us in the world today. And so a lot of times it's it's a way, telling stories is a way to make sense of the social and political injustices happening around you in the world, And so one of my first projects in 2011 was a a collaborative documentary on the Egyptian Revolution, where how can a country write their own history, giving the people on the ground the opportunity to tell their own stories. And so we built an entire collaborative storytelling platform to enable and empower a community to do that, so that the government doesn't take over the narrative, or, like when history finally decides who wins, like how history gets rewritten. So there's definitely an element of, depending on the environment I'm in or the stories that I think are the most relevant or topical at the moment, I think I'm trying to engage and make sense of it in some way. And so same thing with the work at Scatter. The first project that I directed was 0 Days VR, which is about cyber warfare. It explores the story of the Stuxnet virus, which is the first cyber weapon we know of that can cause real world physical destruction. And, that project, for example, was, it's based on a feature documentary by the Academy Award winning director, Alex Gibney. And Gibney has, in his film, it's a documentary, talking heads, a lot of experts in the cybersecurity field and national political players, international political players, all speaking about what is the future of cyber warfare, this kind of fifth dimension to war that is not really well regulated, and talking about specifically what happened with Stuxnet, and there's the political official story versus the the maybe unofficial story that journalists and investigative reporters have discovered, and cyber experts. So there's two sides to that story. And in that film, Alex Gibney says in the feature film, how do you tell a story where your lead character is code, and how do you have code speak for itself? And that just stuck in my head. I was like, oh my God, that's just an inspiration. That was the seed of the inspiration. Well, how can you tell a story with the lead character as code? And specifically 0 Days VR, we actually Scatter worked with Alex Gibney on the feature film. So if anyone has seen the feature film, or if you haven't, there's an NSA informant that Alex Gibney wanted to anonymize because he didn't want to reveal the face or who the character was. And so, in usual traditional ways, you just either blur their face, or you change their voice, or they're hidden in some shadows in documentary. But he wanted to do something that felt creatively and visually in the spectrum of the topic, right, which is code and cyber, the digital worlds. And so he worked with us, and we used DepthKit as a visual effects tool for the feature film. And so that's how the informant was shot and created. And she was cool effects to make her anonymized in a digital way in that same language. And so we had this capture of the informant already done in DepthKit. So she's already, captured volumetrically. And we had pitched him, my partners had pitched him this project would be perfect, in virtual reality, and we'd love to collaborate with you. And he gave us a blessing. He did not want to direct it himself. He was like, I'll sign up as an executive producer. Scatter can run with it. We'll license you the rights. And that's how it started. We're this project just needs to exist in VR. And so we got all the original interviews, and I basically adapted that, all these interviews into this original VR doc. And that's how it started. We got into this adaptation. And the approach I wanted to take with the adaptation was a more kind of, just leveraging virtual reality, why VR? That was my project of exploring what are the affordances of virtual reality, what are the experiential tools. It was also, this project was being made in 2016, 2017 is when we released it. So it was still at least in my creative practice, just seeing what was out there, the rule books were still not, there's not that there's rule books in VR, but you know what I mean? Everyone was basically experimenting. So it felt like such an exciting time to get to explore, the process of making in virtual reality, and a story that is already something that is interesting to me, and extra interesting because I am a computer scientist by training. So there's something something that was extra special to me to tell this story, because I could tell it maybe I have a more of an understanding, I think, maybe than another director would, or another creator. I've already have that technical background. And then how do you communicate it in a visceral way to audiences that aren't technical. And that was sort of how the whole approach I was taking. After that, we did Blackout, which was around, exploring what does it mean to be American after Trump's election, when there was such a polarized political climate and a polarization around identity and race and all of that stuff. So we were just wanting to explore it in that project. And Changing Stain, which is my latest project in collaboration with Rada Studio, co-production with Rada Studio, and I co-directed with Michelle Stevenson and Joe Brewster. That project is episodic. We finished episode 1 and showed it at Sundance and Tribeca last year. And that project is exploring the history of racial injustice in America and Black history. And it takes a magical realist approach to tell that story. And that project, we showed it on the 400-year anniversary of slavery in America. So, and we shot it during 2020, and we were creating it during, what was going on with the George Floyd protests and things like that. So again, they're all very obviously wildly different topics, but I feel like I'm responding to what's going on around me in the work.
When you create story or a narrative, the classical way that we all know is we have a linear storyline. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? How is it for you? Is that still a definition that is applicable for how you work? Or would you say, no, Julia, it's a lot of different processes going on and we cannot look at it that way anymore?
Yeah, I mean, well, you're who you're speaking to. I obviously do not, as someone who has worked in the interactive and immersive space now for over a decade, I definitely do not ascribe to that. I do not believe linear narrative is linear. I also think that's a very Western view. There's like a lot of other cultures, like before technology, or at least immersive technology, there are different ways of exploring narrative or telling narratives that are not in a linear way specifically. And so I do not subscribe to that. I do believe, though, sometimes there are affordances to taking a more linear approach for there's a reason to, versus a reason to take a much more brand, whether you want to call it choose your own adventure or branching or interactive narrative. And I don't believe in one just for the sake of having interactivity or one just for the sake of having agency. I know a lot of people are like, has to have agency, has to do this. I don't subscribe. You'll keep hearing me say, I don't believe in rules. I don't believe in one way or another. I think it has to be driven by the story and what your goal is with this story and what you're trying to communicate and what your goals are with the audience experience. So I don't believe it has to be narrative, and Blackout is a completely non-linear, completely in the sense of choose your adventure, truly choose your adventure experience, where you actually are in a train, you're in a physical train matched to the virtual world, and you walk around and you are able to hear the thoughts of the strangers around you on that train. And the interaction mechanic is, first of all, no train ride is the same, because every time a user steps on the train, it's populated with a different group of people. And how you choose to navigate the train, you'll hear different types of stories, and how much you spend with a character, you will unlock more of the deeper content and deeper stories. So it's actually a very complicated user experience. It looks like, oh, you're just walking around listening to people, but there's actually a lot of thought and intentionality and design behind the user experience and the game mechanics, but done in a more human way. While on the other spectrum, 0 Days, as someone who's someone who comes from new media, 0 Days was my first linear narrative. It wasn't designed linearly. It was actually designed as almost like a cyber detective story, where you kind of can enter different parts of the chapters to piece together who made Stuxnet. That's kind of the open question in the project, like, where does Stuxnet, who made this project, that like this cyber weapon that's attacking Iran's nuclear centrifuges. But unfortunately, in the design process, I realized that we could lose journalistic integrity by going through a branching narrative, because you may skip something that is actually a critical part of the story, or the way it gets built, it will actually communicate differently. And so because of the journalistic integrity of this project was way more important than anything else, and that's actually the role that Gibney played as an AP, I actually decided that project had to be linear. And this is my first linear narrative, but it had to for the journalistic integrity. So I'd say, I think, again, I'll go back. I think it just really depends on the needs and the demands of the story you're trying to tell.
Each project that you've been involved so far, how do you get along with finding a team? Is there a certain, do you work with the same team each time? Do you also say, each project needs their own personalities to kind of get it alive? Can you tell us something about the process when it comes to actually realizing the projects?
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I would say it's one of the most important elements of a production or a project. It's the right team and building the team. And I personally love building the team of each project. Every large project or every large production I've done has had a different team. Before jumping into the team building and the approach, I do want to say one thing, which is a little unique to how Scatter does productions, perhaps, because it's relevant, which is, where the company is definitely focused on building depth kit, and pushing that technology forward, and volumetric filmmaking and the workflows around volumetric filmmaking as well. And the way we work is, at least as in the beginning of the company, we're all hybrid, we're all artists and we're all technologists, and we really believe, and it's a part of the ethos, that art drives innovation. And so in creating any type of technology, any type of tools, we do it in the forges of production. So we have this project we're really trying to achieve, and a lot of times the demands of the creative process or the creative vision, tools don't exist. And that's actually how DepthKit was created. It was actually created during Clouds. If you've heard of that VR documentary by my co-founder, James George, he was one of the co-directors. They were making it because they wanted to create this volumetric documentary on creative coders. And that's how we work. So while we're making the productions, we already have part of the DepthKit team pushing new features, pushing new capabilities, and also building workflows that we need to achieve the projects. And we then share that with the rest of the community and other creators. So that's one part. So I think it's important because it's core to how we work. But then every project then has, we expand, right? So we build around the rest of the team and expand the production team. And the way, personally, every person probably works differently. For me, I have a very iterative creative process, and I like to start with the design process first. And so before actually finding the rest of the team, the first role I look for is the art director. And that's because I think that it's setting the tone of the entire project. So it's figuring out the tone, the principles, the concept art, what is the world we're building. I think from there, everything falls, it kind of trickles down from that. So I work with an art director very closely first. For example, with 0 Days, I really, especially as a female director, I was really, really against using the same recycled tropes of what cyber is. When you think of cyber, I'm sure you think of the same kind of aesthetic. And I was not about that. I wanted to make sure that we're using a new metaphor to talk about, what is, the cyber world. And I did not want to kind of recycle. So for me, I wanted to pick an art director, and I worked with Michael Wrigley on 0 Days VR to build out an entire new language and visual metaphors. And then also for the Changing Same, we worked with Rad Mora, because for the Changing Same, we needed this is a Afrofuturist magical realist project, and we needed to define what is magical realism for us. And we also needed to define what is Afrofuturism that is actually rooted in American culture versus, there's a lot of Afrofuturism that you see in media right now, in films and and TV that actually borrows from Afrofuturism or other culture, maybe Caribbean. But no, we wanted to invent a language that is American, so Black American, and so that's how we approach it. And so Rad Mora, who is Afro-Dominican, he's an artist here in New York. He's amazing. We worked with him for a long time, actually, for a few years on developing the visual worlds and that defining what is magical realism and Afrofuturism and the changing same and the character design. We had this character that's she's from the future in the changing same, and her name is Harriet, and she's the harbinger of the future, and she's 13 foot tall, and she's a wild, like larger than life, and has a crazy costume, and that came through this design process. We also have a very like this crazy time travel mechanic that also came through this creative process, which was how do you travel through time of 400 years of Black history? How do you represent 400 years of Black history? But also, how do we travel between the scenes and then this liminal space that's supposed to represent a collapse of time that's present, future, and past. So all of that, I think, they're very real. This is like where I get like I get really excited, because it's like working on that part. And then from there, honestly, since you now have like the direction of the project, I really do believe the rest of the team, or at least for me, then it starts making sense who are the right fit. So I'd be looking for environment artists that can work within the aesthetic that we've landed on. And so that's how I look for environment artists, or and lighting artists. Sometimes it's the same person, sometimes they're separate people focused on lighting versus the modeling. The sound artists or sound designers are the other very important hire, because they're also setting, just like the visuals are setting the tone, so is the sound and music. And they're I would say the second biggest role. So whether I work with an individual or a team or a company, we're also working in that iterative way. We're like defining the tone, we're defining the themes, we're defining, and I like to work that way, this iterative way, to kind of build out the language, and then we make, and then the rest of the team, whether then there's the technical director, who's like usually my yin to my yang, the person I would collaborate most closely. Like we'll have producers, associate producers, line producers, the depth kit shooter, the person who does the shooting, the cinematographer, is part of Scatter. It's usually Corey Allen at Scatter. And then we have like the post-production process. There's it's usually like, I think on the changing scene we had a team of 20 people. It was a pretty big team. 0 Days was maybe half of that. But we definitely have usually a few developers on a project, and different skill set depending on the project. And I think it's like puzzle pieces to find find that team that will basically kind of breathe life into that creative vision that we've built together.
In terms of prototyping, are you doing it with the projects? And if so, has a certain prototype at some point changed, the way that you looked at the project from the beginning, and then, it went maybe in a different direction or something like this? Yeah.
Yes, 100% every project. I think prototyping, so when I say I have a very iterative process, I think there's prototyping in multiple paths. I think that we're prototyping in the design process. So before touching code, we're also prototyping what would fall under R&D. So a lot of times we'll have this idea and we don't know how to actually do it, which is my favorite. I love that. So for me, that gets me excited too. And I think a lot of the Scatter team gets excited by that too. So, like sometimes, so there's like we'll do R&D and spend time before even like production, just R&Ding and trying to figure out, well, how can this actually work? Can we make this? And then in the production, while we're in Unity, because we work in Unity, and when in the game engine, we have the team and everyone's with, has their branches on Git and we're all working. Sometimes things don't work like you think once you're in VR, and that includes the script. Every time, like you'll lose maybe, I don't know, I think 30% of a script sometimes. So sometimes the narrative will change. I'll say also, what you thought might look really cool, it doesn't. And so, you have to kind of iterate and sometimes we'll spend weeks, like, for example, like 0 days, Stuxnet and the cyber army, Iranian cyber army. Something that's very poetic about 0 days is everything is in real time, and we used code to represent code. So Stuxnet is actually a generative piece of code. The cyber army is a particle system that's in real time. And I just think that's poetic in a nerdy way. But why I'm bringing this up is because it's not easy to create a character that has a personality using generative code that, is telling a story. But we had to prototype. So Stuxnet and the army, we had to try different approaches to make Stuxnet feel like it's this aggressive character, and we have a visual representation that obviously is taking huge creative liberties, but at least is communicating. And we needed to communicate very difficult concepts of how 0 days work, or what are PLCs, and all these concepts. And we did it all using generative code. So we had to prototype that. In the Changing Same, there's two things we didn't know if are possible. One was, I mentioned Harriet, this hybrid avatar. She's 13 foot tall. She's half depth kit, half volumetric video, and half we needed her clothing to change, and sometimes her hair to change, because she's this magical character. And in future episodes, she'll evolve and change how she's dressed and looks. So we needed basically a motion capture 3D modeled animation on the bottom that matches perfectly with the volumetric capture. And so we had to invent this. So what we did is we did an R&D process, and we tried different motion capture techniques. And thanks to Kat Sullivan at NYU and Todd Bryant, they let us borrow their motion capture stage to try a shoot, and we tried different things. And then we realized those were not going to work, and we tried, so finally we landed on the right motion capture that can work with depth kit and the volumetric video. And then we had to R&D also, well, since she has to be 13 foot tall, how do we shoot her so she does look realistically 13 foot tall? So we had to get her shoot her on top of a ladder, and you know what I mean? So there's all these we built a whole workflow essentially and tested it. And then we had to test, well, how can the 3D animation work? And we tried different techniques, and just making Harriet work, I'd say, took months of R&D and prototyping. And the same thing with the time travel mechanic. I think I mentioned it briefly, but what we're doing for the time travel mechanic in the Changing Same is something that's never been done for in VR. It's a complete 3D optical illusion where you're in one 3D world, and then the world completely rips apart and breaks apart like an earthquake, and then it reveals another 3D world. And to do that, we had to, first of all, build our own rendering pipeline. So we built a custom rendering pipeline, and we prototyped that for, I would also say, 2 to 3 months until it finally worked, because we didn't know if it was going to work, because it's a real 3D optical illusions of showing two worlds at the same time, and then making you think something is actually 2D, but and ripping it apart. So it's an optical illusion in VR, and we had to have, we tried a bunch of different things. We did, a lot of prototypes. And while for some people, maybe that process can be, I don't know, terrifying or something, I find that super exciting, because I think that's where you get to innovation. I think that's where you get to the really cool ideas. So 100%, yes.
Coming a little bit back to you co-founding a company, and maybe there are many people and women out there, who think about that. Was it for you a step into cold water, and did you just do it, or did you had some experience before that?
So I think this is relevant. So I'm going to start from the beginning as a baby, which is I come from Silicon Valley. So I'm born and raised in Silicon Valley. And my father had a startup, and I grew up in the hallways of his startup, and all my friends in high school, all their fathers had either companies or they were VCs. So I grew up in this world to the point where a lot of my Silicon Valley friends, I left Silicon Valley after high school, so I haven't been back since I was 16. But a lot of my friends since then are founders of companies or investors, and I that is definitely the world I grew up in. And the fact that it still is that way in that community, I think, is relevant. It's kind of part of what shaped me. That being said, when I had my first I guess new media documentary project, which is this 18 Days in Egypt project I mentioned in 2011, about the Egyptian revolution and how can a country tell their own history. We had built a tool. We built a whole platform. Like we built a team, we built a platform. My partner at the time, Jigar Mehta, and I, and we got a lot of requests at the time from the Arab Spring and like other activists and storytellers. Like, we want this platform and we want to do this in Tunisia. We want to do this in like Syria. And we're like, okay, let's make a product. And so I started a company back then with Jigar, and it was called GroupStream, and it was a collaborative storytelling platform. I was part of a startup accelerator. We did the whole thing. Unfortunately, like a huge percentage of startups didn't succeed, but I did get that muscle. I got that training. I learned how to build a product, how to pitch, we were in Silicon Valley pitching all the VC. So I definitely got that training. And I would say, 10 years, not 10 years later, but like, several years later, when I did meet James and Alexandra in New York, I was really, as I said, already excited about this immersive media space, beyond VR. So I'll say that it's like VR was really exciting, but it's not just VR for me. It's like, there was a vision we had, or a shared vision we had about the future of where film will be going, narrative will be going, gaming, like that. We always saw, and we always used to say that volumetric filmmaking, this word that we invented, is the marriage between gaming and filmmaking. It's about leveraging the power and flexibility of game engines and marrying it with the craft and sensibility of filmmaking. So we had this shared vision, and I would say we happened to each other, is the way I like to describe it. It's not like I knew that I wanted to work in volumetric video and volumetric filmmaking. I have the cluster of my background that I told you about. I was already kind of working in these hybrid spaces and already a pretty multidisciplinary person with a hybrid background, and so were they. And I think it just was a natural fit, just based on what we were like interested in doing, and we had very complementary skill set. So while they were focused on building the product and everything, I was focused on building out our creative arm, the productions, and fundraising for them. How do you do R&D during productions, and that whole arm, and defining what volumetric filmmaking is. So that's like how it happened. So it's not my first company, but it's definitely hard work. And I would say that building a startup or building a company is not for the faint of heart. It's definitely it's your baby, it really is. It's like I think I really do believe it's the success of these companies is the team. It's the team, it's the heart, it's soul, it's like how you approach it. And one thing that's maybe tangential, but I think is interesting to talk about a little bit as a woman, specifically for this podcast, is I used to be a software engineer, and so I would be only the one woman on huge teams, multinational teams, and I was so used to being in that space, of being like the only woman, that it was so important to me to kind of hide the gender part. I didn't want to be seen as the woman, I wanted to be seen as the really great engineer, just like the rest of them. And then one thing though, as like having my first startup and just being in that startup culture back then, which very male dominated, and this is pre-Me Too movement, there was a lot of problems in the startup world and the VC world, which have now been exposed. But at the time I experienced those things, and I was like, this is just hostile, a hostile environment for a woman. I don't feel that way anymore. Like now, I think post Me Too movement, a lot more women founders getting involved, but also female VCs. One of our founders are funders. Is WXR, the Women in XR Fund. And their thesis is they only invest in companies in the XR space that are female founded. And that's their thesis. And I love that, and they're one of our Scatter's investors. So there's that whole element, which I do think the culture has changed. And I think that's a positive for women. And there's a lot more female founders and in the XR space. And also one other thing that I think is interesting to touch upon is I kind of sometimes feel like I'm straddling two worlds, so like I'll be on a panel or like a talk or something, and I'm talking about like being a creator. I am a creator, but then I'm also like, or Scatter is also playing a role as a tool builder. And, there is no, as I'm sure you think the same thing, there's bias in technology. There's bias in how you build technology. There's bias in building software, because who builds it and how you design it and who you design it for, there's bias in that. And why I bring that up, I think it's relevant in this conversation, because I think having female perspectives, or diverse perspectives, different race, ethnicities, genders, or gender identity, building technology will create technology for those other more inclusive technologies for a wider base. And so I think that's something that's important, because how we even designed DevKit, how the workflow works, the way we talk about it, the way we communicate it, like I'm actually quite proud that it's widely available. So it's used around the world. It's in South Africa, it's in the Middle East, it's in Asia, and that's, I think, part of a testament to the team, us, like us wanting to be inclusive, but also like the creators themselves. There's a lot of women that are like volumetric creators with DevKit, and other, and it's, as I said, there's a diversity there. And I think that comes from making sure that as tool builders or software makers, that you are actually building in an inclusive way. I feel like I talked about a huge spectrum of things right now, but I hope I answered the original question.
No, but I think that's exactly what it should be, because there is a lot to talk about, and sometimes there is like maybe a short part of what you just said, what one of our listeners or something, and then they're interested and, they're researching more about it. So that's exactly what I also love about the way of communicating in this way, what we're doing for the podcast. So don't worry at all about that. And I had this thought while I listened to you, because when you said, in the beginning, you were the only woman and a lot of, male environment around you, and now it's changing, definitely. And I love that. And I think, I don't know about your experience, but in at the beginning, you said that there is a huge community also in New York, female XR creators supporting each other. And the thought that I had while I listened to you is that I also experience the change now, and I experience that I'm a lot more open to speaking about, certain topics or ideas that I might not have had a few years ago, because, you would have been looked at in a way, who is interested in that, or what are you talking about? Now it changes a lot. And also like, the guys that I work with, they're so much more interested in the female world, actually. And this is something amazing. And I wanted to ask, because obviously the States approaches the whole topic a little bit different than Europe, or especially Germany at the moment. How's the exchange, within your other co-creators, female creators in New York? And do you sometimes specifically search for women for projects, or is it really the skill set of the person in general that you kind of are looking for?
Yeah, these are all really good questions. Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate what you said, we talked about this earlier, which is I do the New York scene, and now somewhat LA as well, because a lot of the New York creators have moved to LA, or in between New York and LA. There is a in the XR space, or VR, a lot of women creators and directors, producers, founders of their own production companies or their own game studios. They're not all necessarily American, there's actually a mix of Europeans, Americans, and different regions. And I would say that what's really exciting about New York in general, and why I actually moved here back in the day for art school, was because there is a very active and tightly knit, or a community. There's a community. That's the word. There's a community here. And a lot of these creators have been working before XR. So, a lot of these friends of mine I've known them for a decade because they were working in new media, or they were working in other types of media at the time. And as I said, people evolve with emerging technology or whatever they're excited about exploring. So a lot of these people, whichever side they fall on, whether they're the directors, producers, or executive producers, or developers, they've been, at least the people in my network have been at this for a while. So I'd say that's exciting. Ratios, I don't know. It feels different to me. Like, I definitely do not feel like I'm the only woman in the room at all. Like I can name several amazing creators, like, and I don't have enough fingers to do that, or just for example, we were, The Changing Same was nominated for an Emmy, and the Emmy Award was last Thursday, 1 week ago. And 4 out of the 5 nominees were all female directors or female-led companies. And we're all friends. We all know each other, like we all have been respecting each other's work for years. And I think, and all women of color also, which was very interesting. So I think that's something to celebrate. Like, I was just like looking at the list of nominees, I was like, wow, like that's impressive, all women, So that's something, and on the other side, around like myself personally, as a, when I'm hiring or building teams, I am always looking for diversity, including women, but also diversity in other ways. All of our projects do have women on the teams, but sometimes I can't find as many. For example, in environment artists, like there are women, but I definitely find a lot more, that are men than I do find women. Same thing with certain fields, like I'll find, and we really try. Like, something I'm very proud of about Scatter is like it's practically a 50-50 balance of the team. There's like in every vertical, marketing, engineering, product, like we have women and men, and I think that's really exciting. And I think that was actually intentional as a team, as founders. It was important that there is that balance, gender, equity and balance. I'd say I try. I can't always find that teammate that I'm looking for. And even like, sadly, even in like engineering still, and at least in the United States, there are a lot of amazing female coders or game developers, but they're pretty far in between in my own experience. So still a ways to go there. I'm hoping, that's changing, but definitely the ratio is not, equal there.
Yeah, no, that's my hope too, definitely. Because yes. do you know, I heard the story that in the beginning of coding, actually, there were a lot of women who went into this field because they were so interested, a new language and we can create this. So in the beginning, it was a lot more women basically than men. But then something changed, 2 things. So the military got more and more involved. And, because of hierarchical issues in the military, all of a sudden, it wasn't so great anymore to have women with that knowledge. And then what happened was the personalization of the computer. When it became a product, to sell, and it was addressed to men a lot. So for some reason, that was the time where many female, coders kind of got kicked out, or the whole situation changed. And when I heard that story, I was like, okay, let's try and do it differently in VR. Let's keep them. Let's get them and let's keep them. Or XR, because of this new field that is there to explore. And as you said, nobody knows yet, all of the ins and outs and, the how to do's. So if we can be part of it to create it, then that would be wonderful and lovely, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I have to shout out a name, which is Ada Lovelace, which she's like, like in the 1800s, she's a woman who is is said to have invented or wrote the first computer program, and so obviously in the computer programming, software engineering world, Ada Lovelace is a huge name. But you're right. It started with all these phenomenal women, and let's keep it that way within VR.
You talked about DevKit so much now. Can you just shortly tell us what it actually does, and also in terms of how you were involved and how you used it so far?
Yeah, so DepthKit is a volumetric video solution that uses off-the-shelf hardware like a laptop and depth sensors like Azure Connects. And the way it works essentially is, DepthKit captures using these cameras, these depth cameras, it captures the world in depth and in color to create these 3D holograms. So it's about capturing real people and real human performance. And so talking about my role specifically, I played different roles over the years at Scatter. I started off as building out like I was creative director and building out the productions and the production arm. So how do you leverage DepthKit, essentially as a tool, as like how do you push, I would say, building North Star content for volumetric filmmaking. Like, what are the possibilities in pushing this medium forward? What can you do with these tools? And so sometimes it would mean adding new features as we're working on productions on DepthKit. Sometimes it would be adding new workflows, and then we'd package it for other creators. So something very simple example, like in the making of 0 Days, we built a visual effects package to create the character, and then we gave it to the community and started selling that package. And at the next year in Tribeca, I think all the DepthKit projects were leveraging them in some way. There was Vestige, if you've ever seen that, by Aaron Bradbury, or Asad Malik's Terminal 3. They all used that to create different aesthetics and beautiful projects. And I think that's like the way we work. It's like, trying it first, and then when it's something that we think other creators would need, all the way to the Changing Same. Changing Same was the first volumetric film to leverage our enterprise product, DepthKit Studio, which is our first multi-camera portable stage to create 3D capture, 360 capture. And we were building DepthKit Studio while in production. We were also trying out new workflows that didn't exist at the time and building them out. And then we published them on our blogs and tutorials for the other creators to learn and to use. So that's like how we work. And so my role has evolved from that into, basically Chief Innovation Officer, where it's like more formal. It's formalizing the R&D side of this. So it's not just focus on productions. It's also how do we do R&D at Scatter? What does that mean? How are we servicing different types of strategies, different parts of exploring new projects or products, like live streaming, for example. I was leading internal workshops at Scatter, trying to prototype, using this design process I'm talking about. How do we reimagine live streaming as a product, and what can we do with it? What are the possibilities? I also, I have been in charge of the brand and marketing and overseeing that and the team under that. So a lot of Scatter's marketing activities or community engagement fell under me. So VFNYC, I would be co-producing. I would be overseeing our product marketing and building a team, and how to build a team there. And same thing with the marketing. And I'm not a traditional marketing person, as I've already explained, but I think I guess everything we've been doing has been in the service of education. So I would say what I've been doing is education. It's been community engagement. We've been supporting the community with projects or in kind in some way. So independent creators that needed some support, and that's and plus we've also been just doing a lot of, I would say, so much of our effort is in community engagement and just general education. And I think that has, all of these efforts combined has created, basically DepthKit has become the most widely used volumetric solution because of that. The most published projects that are volumetric video are with DepthKit. And I think it's a mix of all these efforts, plus the tool is easy to use, and it's for the class that it's in, it's actually one of the best in quality as well.
Can you tell us about the future of Yasmin? Is there a project at the moment that you're working on that you could talk a little bit about? What's the situation?
Yeah. I mean, so a little bit of an announcement is that we've been talking about my work and Scatter, and I have actually stepped away from an active role at Scatter to a more advisory role. And so, I still will remain the co-founder at Scatter, and I'll still be, as I mentioned, an advisor, and I'm deeply committed to the company in the future because I do believe in its mission. But I think that, what that means for me and what's next is, I want to continue to tell stories. I still want to pursue creative projects. Obviously, I'm still interested in this space and in the XR space, but I'm also really excited about other emerging technologies and, kind of having a little bit of a conversation with them, like the synthetic imagery and artificial intelligence and and so forth. So there's a lot of different things I'm excited about, different things I'm excited to explore. It's a new chapter for me, so TBD what's next. But I'm very excited about what's next, and
I'm
yeah,
actually
I'll
too.
let you know.
I'm really curious what's going to be the next the next project that you'll be working on. Thank you so much, Yasmin, for having this talk with me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely.